services. That's
No.
my own guess. I haven't looked at it closely.
Now, just as a general principle, what was brought up in our previous show was that sometimes these things are done. For example, you'll have one listing for your rank and file employees and another for, let's say, your consultants and that sort of
Right.
thing, because the second listing can be put somewhere else, which makes your original amount for, let's say, the Department of Agrarian Reform not so big, which then lets you comply with the constitutional requirement that the Department of Education receives the biggest funding. Is this something that...
No, every department would have that kind of budgetary structure where you have part of it will really be salaries, and then there's a budget there for consultants, part-timers, etc. Department of Education would have that, Department of Health, and so forth. I think in this particular case, there are really two sources of funds for the DAR.
Okay.
One is a lump sum fund, and to spend that, you just need a resolution by the council. And so maybe they decided, I'm not sure whether they decided to set aside X amount for personal services, which are in the nature of contractual workers.
Contractual workers. So looking forward, if you're going to propose actual reforms, the difficulty of these reforms is that, precisely as the question from the floor pointed out, there's this ambiguity and flexibility is convenient both for the executive and Congress. So
yeah, it's a question of could they heal themselves, right? Because right now it works out fine for the legislators having their congressional incentives there. I can think of two reforms. One is to require the results of the conference committee. In other words, if there are any adjustments made at that level, although it's done in a very secretive way, they have to come up with a report, and that report should be circulated 3 days before both houses will actually vote on the budget. So there's transparency. So it's not limited to only a few people, what happened there, but to the 240 congressmen and the 24 senators.
because right now each delegation is roughly about 20 members.
About
from
12.
each.
About
12.
12, right.
So even smaller.
Smaller. And the other reform, I think, is you really want the conference committee to just be limited to the disagreeing provision. No new item should be introduced in the third chamber. Okay.
Now these reforms could be undertaken by a law, or do you not even require a law?
It's just an internal. There's a reform which I think is necessary, but no sitting president will agree to it, which is to clip her power to realign within the budget. In other words, come up with what's called imaginary savings. That's what she done, right?
But Congress in the past has clipped these powers. I mean,
I don't think so. No, our budget rules really favor a strong president because of that line item veto power. The Constitution speaks of a limited role for Congress. I mean, the Constitution says Congress may decrease but not increase the budget as submitted by the president. So our budget rules really foster fiscal discipline, but we don't follow the rules. It's as simple as that.
Well, we have another question.
Yes, Lance texted us in. Who should investigate this? Can the Senate investigate one of its own?
Yeah, I suggest that an independent body do this kind of thing, right? In the same manner that I find it weird that the Department of Agriculture will investigate the scums within the department. So I suggest that an independent body be created to investigate this.
Ina here has a question as well.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is, it was earlier labeled, this issue, that it's much ado about nothing. Well, for an average person, as myself, 200 million and more is clearly not nothing. So there has to be some action to be done about this. So my question is, regardless of the amount, regardless of, say, this was blown out of proportion, how can we approach this issue without turning it into some political circus?
Yeah, in fact, the fact that Central Action spotted those two considered redundant appropriation for one project cast doubt on the entire budget. So we're not only talking here of 200, 400 million, we're talking of 1.4 trillion or 1.2 trillion budget. And as I said, the way to move forward here is to create an independent body, because I doubt whether the senators themselves could.
Although
You
I
want to
disagree
remove it
with
from-
you on that one, because that would be an ethics committee perhaps question, or even for finance.
Yeah, but this is really budgetary and some technical things. They could, if you trust their ethics committee.
Well, based on your question, the first question there, were any laws broken by having two items for the same item, two provisions for the same?
No, but if the money will be released for the same project, there could be a violation.
How can we find out if that money is released for the same?
There are paper trails for that. Okay?
But it would require vigilance, and
Correct. And it would require access to information, which right now is kind of very difficult.
Could that be put under executive privilege?
It could be. I mean, because one way of doing that, as I said, is declare it as savings, right? So it goes to a pool, and then later on, it could be used for the same project. Okay. So we need all these documents, and that means that we should have access to those documents.
So the most we can say at this point is you have a morally ambiguous provision in the budget, but a legally permissible incident taking place. Do we have? Okay. So if you're going to boil it down, it could be as easy as simply the bicameral conference committee saying, henceforth, we will release a report on what we decided.
Correct.
But if they don't do it, then it would require someone actually proposing a law.
No, I think internally they can.
It's
do
really within the power of
Congress.
So my view. Now there's a lot of heat and very little light in politics these days because of too little information, which in turn breeds mistrust. Back when we did 2 shows on the drafting and deliberations on the national budget, our guests and I pointed out that never before have so many ordinary citizens been involved in the budgetary process. There is an irony, however, in former Representative Gilbert Remulla replying to Senator Lacson with a line invented and favored by the very administration both political figures oppose. That line is, bring it to the proper forum. The Senate, to my mind, and I disagree with our guest on this one, is the proper venue for such things, at least for the preliminaries. Only when the time comes for charging people in court can and should the proper forum change. Until then, this goes to show that if there is much to take heart from in terms of reforms to the budgetary process, there remains opportunities aplenty for confusion, misunderstanding, and quite possibly monkey business. Thanks to Professor Diokno, our explainee Robbie Pilares, and our studio audience from the UP School of Economics. I'm Manolo Quezon, and this is The Explainer.